Good morning, everyone. We are right at 11 o'clock. I think we will get started, work through some of the housekeeping and introductions as people continue to join. So good morning. My name is Janelle Hamblin. I'm the manager of swine health with Manitoba Pork, and I'm here today to chair as well as present on our PEDv 2021 town hall. Today you'll have updates from myself on the outbreak scenario, the current outbreak status. We're going to go over quite a few of the risk factors that we have identified. Dr. Tony Nickel will be speaking to us on loadout biosecurity, and then Dr. Glenn Dyser from Manitoba CDO will be coming on to speak to transport biosecurity, dead stock pickup and routing, equipment disinfection, area spread, and weather analysis that we have found through this outbreak investigation. Between the presentations, we will be switching off some of the screens, so please bear with us as we work through any of the technology. If you do have questions throughout the presentation, please at any point type them into the Q&A box, which should be located on the bottom of your Zoom window. And if you have questions, like I say, at any point throughout the presentation related to the content, type them into that box. I guess before we dive right in, I would ask Joey, I'm assuming you can hear me loud and clear and you can see me and you can see my screen. Thumbs up, excellent. Well, with that said, I think we will dive in. I know we have a lot to cover today. So I think with that said, let's get rolling. So this is the picture of the outbreak as it stands. I will dive into a little bit more detail, but I do know that a lot of folks work off of landmarks and getting your bearings as to what things look like here in the province. So without any formal identification, we do have majority of our outbreak, our cases are located in what we are calling the high risk area for PED. Reason for that is that we have seen majority of our cases, or a large number of our cases, either begin in that area or continue in that area in previous years, and 2021 is really no different. So in and around, like you said, this Reshot, St. Anne, Randolph, Tumond area is where majority, 19 of our current 21 cases are, with 2 of them having jumped the 75 highway over here in around the 305 Bronk Hill area. What our current picture looks like in speaking points, we have 21 new PED cases for 2021, 7 of which are sow operations, 2 nurseries, 8 finishers, and 2 fair to finish. Fortunately, we have had biocontainment implemented at the onset of clinical signs, if not earlier, for the majority of our cases. When we started to see breaks in that high-risk area, many producers were on high alert and had implemented some level of biocontainment even before they had seen clinical signs on their farm. This has helped lock things down a little bit earlier. We have worked with the Chief Veterinary Office, Dr. Glenn Dyser and his team on the case investigation. Full case investigations are underway, working with the IPs, the herd veterinarians, the CBO, and us here at MPC. We have implemented surveillance of nursery farms surrounding the 5-kilometer buffer area. This practice has been in place since 2019 and acts as a bit of a perimeter surveillance to see if the virus is expanding outside of the current buffer areas. We've also been encouraging, and many producers have been working to do pre-movement testing if they are located in a buffer area to minimize risk when you're moving animals. This has been very useful. Really wanting to make sure that we're not moving the virus any farther than we need to. And lastly, of course, enhanced biosecurity is of utmost important and critical, not only in the buffer areas in that southeast part of Manitoba, but throughout the province. So look back in time, PED in Manitoba. I don't think anybody on this call will forget our big years, if you will, for 2017 and 2019. And I will show you, I guess, the trend as to where we're going in 2021 as compared to these previous years. But We have surpassed our case numbers for 2018 this year already as well. Speaking to that trend line, this is the weekly incidence of our PED cases from 2017, 2019, and then adding on our 2021 cases. So the number of cases that confirm each week is along the bottom. And as you can see, it's trending very unnervingly close at this point to our 2017 and 2019 cases and what has come on at that point. Not to say that it will continue in 2019 and 2017 trajectories. However, what we're seeing right now is not really, I guess, what we would like to see. But we're hoping that that curve can come down in the coming weeks. I know a lot of the questions that I typically get around PED cases are, who has broken in the past? How many repeat cases have we had? Where were we at this point in previous outbreaks? So I tried to put together some stats as to tell a bit of that story. This graph reflects similar to the timeline that was put together on the last slide. This is the cases in the first 6 weeks, not by week, but total over the first 6 weeks of the outbreak, which is approximately where we're at today. And what we're seeing here again is very strong similarities to the 17 and 19 case numbers in the first 6 weeks of the outbreak. So if this is the story that we're telling, I think we probably want to choose a different ending if it's that type of book. In terms of repeat cases, in 2021, we have 9 cases that are first break. We have 6 that are second break, 4 that is their third break of PED, and 2 that is unfortunately their fourth break of PED over the span of cases in Manitoba. I should note that of this first break, 7 of those are in the high-risk area and 2 of which are in the bronchial area. Breaking that down a little bit more in terms of risk probabilities, I worked with Dr. Deiser yesterday to crunch some of these numbers in terms of looking at probabilities of infection if you're located in that high-risk area, as well as if you had broken before or if you hadn't. So looking at these numbers and the number of total premises in those high-risk areas, we found that there was a 17.5% probability of infection for premises that had never broke with PED before, and a 32.4% probability of infection if the premises had been previously infected, so nearly double if you had broken before. And there's lots of factors at play in terms of why that might be. We have done analysis in the past on barn age and design, which is a factor we have found to contribute to PED, as well as some area spread and biosecurity factors are at play here too. We continue to operate our PED surveillance program at high-risk or high-traffic facilities, in Manitoba. So our federal abattoirs, our assembly yards, our wash facilities, and we have had positive doc samples continue to come in and be followed up on. This is a really good indicator of what is happening, the level of shedding in the province, as well as validating the C&D practices that are happening at the facilities. We do know that the docks are cleaned and disinfected at the end of each day. And we do have protocols in place for accepting PED recovered sites. So we are at the point in the outbreak where our earlier cases have held and followed that 4-week time frame to hold the animals, and they will be considered recovered and moving into slaughter. However, there is still risk associated with this, in which case we are putting in risk mitigation measures, including moving those animals on designated days, going through designated docks, and communicating out to the sector when those animals are being moved, as well as, I didn't put on the slide, but following biosecure routing that is being developed by the CBO. Communication and outreach continues to be a strength here in Manitoba. We are working with our Manitoba Coordinated Disease Response. Those updates are being sent out to producers when a new case comes on. Just for a reminder, the Manitoba Coordinated Disease Response is a producer-only password-protected information sharing portal. It requires the signature of a confidentiality agreement to share your information and have access to others' information as it relates to PED statuses and locations in the province. Our Manitoba Disease Management Group and our Manitoba Swine Vet Group are meeting regularly, weekly or every other week, to discuss the outbreak and what's happening on the ground, share ideas and share information. We at MPC have been working as well with ag media and providing updates to ag media, so creating our talking points and understanding and modifying those as the outbreak evolves. As well, we've had direct to producer and stakeholder emails coming out of MPC as well as through Chop Talk. So there has been some a lot of information that's being shared throughout the outbreak. Now we will move over to Dr. Nicol. We are going to highlight some of these risk factors that we have identified or discussed throughout this outbreak. As I mentioned, Dr. Nicol is going to be speaking to loadout biosecurity, and then we'll have Dr. Deiser come on to speak to transport dead stock equipment C&D, as well as the wind and weather analysis that has been done over at the CDO. Lastly, just as a note, in case it comes up in the questions, we don't seem to have found manure to be at play in this outbreak. The timing of that suggests, the timing of the outbreak, though it did come at the end of manure application season, we haven't been able to link manure application to any of the cases. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and invite Dr. Nicol to share his screen and begin his presentation on loadout biosecurity.
Okay, is that coming through okay? You're on mute there.
Yep, sorry, I muted too quickly. Yes, it's coming through very clear. You are not in presentation mode if you would like to be. But
yep, no, I won't be. I just wanted to make sure we're good. Okay, good. There we go.
Perfect.
Oh, I got animation and everything. Wasn't supposed to be there. Boy, there we go. Good morning, everyone. I'll have to forgive my cough. I'm going to be coughing throughout you a little bit. Asked to talk about a little bit about loadout biosecurity and some of the things that we've done. But before that, recognize a fair number on the list of people that are watching. So my name is Tony Nicol. I've been with the Progressive Group here for about 10 and a half years or so, based out of Niverville. Formerly with Puritone, if you were in that group as well. So I'll try to get through this fairly quick. I know we got a lot to get through. So when I started putting this together, it was difficult just to single a loadout on its own because there's a lot that go on either side of that loadout security topic. So we'll just go over why we're talking about this, some background on the virus itself, how it moves in relation to loadout, the livestock truck itself, the trailer itself, what's going on in the yards and why that's important as it relates to the loadout, and then actually get into the barn on the loadout side and talk about that a little bit, and kind of try to leave a couple of minutes for some questions. So always start with a disclaimer, especially when I'm talking to folks outside of our group. So this is, of course, information for information purposes, and it's opinions of our group and myself. Not every single practice or recommendation that we're going to discuss here today is going to necessarily be applicable to every single situation, every single farm, but it is going to be almost everything in here there should be parts of it at least applicable to every single type of hog facility. And of course, I have to respect the fact that I'm not the herd veterinarian for every farm represented on this call, and so please discuss anything that you see here that's different than what you're already doing with your herd veterinarian before you implement. Okay, with that, let's talk about loadout. Why are we talking about loadouts specifically of all the different things to talk about? Well, if you take a look at our group itself, Since 2017, we've had 35 outbreaks, including this year. And each single one of them, we've identified one or two most probable routes of entry of that virus. And the loadout dock entry ranked third among causes. And so that's one of the main reasons we're talking about it today. It is one of the major routes that this virus is getting into farms, at least our farms for sure. The only two areas that we've identified as more common routes of entry are, of course, the aerosol or airborne area type spread, and also movement of actual positive pigs into a barn. So that's pretty obvious. So those are the only two that are more common than coming down the loadout dock in our situation. So out of those 35, I think six or seven of them have been identified as coming on the loadout dock during either receiving or shipping of pigs. So back in 1819, we started looking at how this virus was moving around. It was moving in ways that were a little bit strange. It seemingly was jumping over barns on multi-barn sites, and that were completely locked down. And so then we started looking up in attics in some of these farms, and we're finding road dust, what looks exactly like the road. And we tested some of this road dust sitting in some of these attics of breaking barns, and found lots of PED virus in there, just on the inside of the air intake and the gable ends. So at that point, 2-3 years ago, we recognized dust is probably a significant form or method of spread of this virus. So if you're completely falling asleep and you want to wake up for about 10 seconds, this is the 10 seconds you want to remember, because it's the basis behind everything that we've kind of set up to try to mitigate PED entry down the loadout dock, and that is that all of our hog barns are essentially gigantic vacuum cleaners. And the warmer the conditions outside, of course, the greater the suction on our vacuum cleaners. And so that is basically the basis behind how this virus gets into these barns most of the time. Not every single time, but a lot of the time. Okay, so, and especially as it relates to the loadout. Okay, so let's jump a little bit into the background before we get right into the biosecurity stuff. PED is not a lot different than a lot of viruses and other pathogens of people and pigs and other species. Most viruses and other pathogens like to attach themselves to something, and that facilitates their movement and spread. They rarely grow legs and walk themselves around. Don't know any that can do that, so they attach themselves to various things. We'll just call them particles. And unfortunately, you can't see them attaching themselves to these things, and these particles are extremely small. If we could actually see them, it would make our life a heck of a lot easier in terms of biosecurity and what we should prioritize, but we can't. So we have to go by some evidence and a lot of CSI type work. So what are they usually attached to? Well, most commonly dirt, dust, mud, snow, water vapor droplets, frozen water vapor, ice, that kind of stuff is what they attach to. And like I mentioned, it facilitates those the spread of that virus. So, and I heard this breaking with PED, and this isn't a whole lot different than any other major pathogen of pigs. Breaking herds generally will have a large amount of virus getting attached to water vapor and dust particles within the barn, and then being exhausted out the exhaust fans into the surrounding area around the barn. Okay, so, and there, from there, because it's attached to dust and vapor and things, it is somewhat airborne as those particles float around and can spread. Okay, so when it comes to biosecurity, because like almost everything in life, you need anything important in life, that is, generally speaking, we have a backup plan. And if it's really important, we have a backup plan to the backup plan, just in case, as a fail-safe, in case bad things happen, we have a plan. And PED biosecurity is really no different, or biosecurity in general is no different. There is no single silver bullet preventative to keep PED out of a herd. And so knowing that, we know we have to have several layered approaches to biosecurity when it comes to keeping bugs out, particularly PED. And that's why we seemingly have a lot of redundant things to try to mitigate the risk. Okay, so back to the barn here now. Once inside, that virus will need further assistance to get itself to the next site to infect another hog farm. So most commonly, trucks, traffic, those types of things that are around the farm at the time, and also wind will grab a hold of these dust vapor particles and move them over onto the yard, onto the driveway, and start moving it within a very large, well, relatively large radius around that farm. The exact radius we don't know, but it is the basis behind a lot of these surveillance perimeters that are put around the farm, which are usually a couple of kilometers. And so knowing that that's generally how far this virus likes to spread, that's where that comes from. So then, once it's been moved onto lanes, onto roads, moved onto another yard that has pigs, all that's left is to get it into the farm site itself. So we're not going to talk too much about the actual livestock truck itself. That's a whole other topic on its own. Let's just assume that clean trucks are coming. And unfortunately, however, no matter how clean we make a truck, or even if it's brand new and has never seen a pig before, a truck coming into an area that has PED or has had PED in the past, and that virus is still stuck onto some particles sticking around on gravel roads, or any road for that matter, those clean trucks can actually pick up that virus up off the road, wherever it's traveling, and be a source of moving this thing even closer and onto yards. Okay, so one of the things that we look at too, of course, is the air patterns around these trucks in terms of how does that actually happen. And, this isn't the greatest drawing as it's a pull trailer, but the idea basically is, so the circle's a little off here, but you get a nice current coming underneath these trailers that then it turns back on itself and drops a lot of dust up and along the back of these trailers. Okay, so this thing could be a brand new trailer, but if we're driving it into PED areas, this backdrafting will stick material off the road onto these trailers. Okay, so this was just my truck yesterday. It was completely washed and clean, and there was no snow in the back of my truck. Probably 10 miles of driving in the country. Not a lot of deep snow either, but you can see how it just sits on the back here as the current comes from underneath, comes back up and around, and it sits down on the back end of my vehicle. And these trailers, these livestock trailers, are really no different. And did a little bit of work on some of these a couple of years ago where we were trying to find that virus as it traveled down country roads with a livestock trailer. And we didn't have a lot of miles on this trailer, and we had about 3 inches of dust sitting on this back bumper right here. This whole back was covered in dust, but it really accumulated along this bumper. And so that was an interesting thing to see. So knowing that it's picking up virus and has some interesting air patterns, I got a couple of, just calling them good practices, I guess. Some of these sound pretty simple, but you'd be surprised sometimes how often these things fall through or don't happen. So number one, make sure all the panels are actually in place on these trailers. This one obviously doesn't have panels. So by panels, of course, I mean fill these things all in. Keep this trailer from drawing in road material as it's traveling down the road. Sounds basic, and it's actually supposed to happen. At least the commercial transport companies are supposed to be putting all these panels in as they go empty to pick up hogs, but that doesn't always happen. So that's an important thing to do, especially in the back, but also the sides, so we don't suck in that road material. Okay, so talked about the bumper. That bumper, of course, here is what touches your barn. And of course, that dust is sitting on top, so it's right in line with your loadout dock when this thing backs up to it. Okay, so you can probably guess what I'm going to talk about next. So next, one of the things that we like to try to do as much as we can is take and rinse this off. Actually, we rinse the bumper and we rinse the entire back of this truck off, knowing that it has the most backdraft is happening and suction of road material is happening on this backside of this trailer. We take a solution of double strength Synergize or Gluquat. Really doesn't have to be a high power disinfectant, and just blow this all off of here with that solution. And that is substituted in winter and freezing temperatures with 100% windshield washer fluid, methanol, so that it doesn't freeze. Now, one of the things that we've identified too is that's an extra trip outside for producers. We don't know when that truck is coming. He doesn't always phone, or we're not in cell phone areas or coverage areas. So some of the bigger commercial trucking companies will carry a sprayer with them and do this for us. And so when they get to the end of the lane, they'll get out and they'll spray that back off completely, well away from the loadout dock, and then they'll get back in their truck and proceed to back that thing up So it is something that they can do. Some of them will do it for you if you request it. So that is a very important thing that we've identified as the risk factor, is that dust on the back of those trailers. The trucking companies have requested that just in case that they forget their sprayer, or their sprayer is empty, or whatever, it doesn't work, to have one ready at the farm anyways as a backup. And you're going to need it anyways for one of these other good practices I have. So that's a good idea. Okay, as we discussed, you can assume that if you're anywhere near any of these PED areas, it's a good practice to assume that PED is lying everywhere around your site. It may not be in your site yet, but assume that it's around there and act accordingly. And so if it's on the driveway, and everybody that lives out in the country realizes how dusty it can get in the spring and summer, excuse me. So, and also that we've identified this virus likes to sit in dust and get sucked into barns on that dust. Started dust proofing farm lanes, and particularly around entrances, so loadout docks. So calcium basically is what I'm talking about. Spraying down calcium in front of these loadout docks, and we extend that out the entire gravel portion of in front of the farm. Depending on where the farm is, if they're right up against a municipal road, we'll often talk to the municipality and say, look, we're gonna dust proof this portion here right along this barn, because it's right up against the municipal road. Please don't grade it all out of there. And they'll be good about that. They usually don't. So we go ahead and dust proof that also, so we don't have PED/dust getting sucked in on the loadout. Okay, so that's number 3. So we talked about the PED on the outside of these trailers. Let's just assume that there is. Some of that stuff will often drop, and there's a couple of reasons why it's going to drop off of there. One is those air brakes will often send puffs of air out, and I think it's pressure releasing. I'm no mechanic, but I think there's pressure release going on there, and you'll hear the puff, and you get a kick of dust coming out of there. So that's part of where dust proofing comes from too, to avoid that kick of dust while he's sitting there. And then the other one is we use quite a bit of hydrated lime, especially in high risk situations, high risk areas, where we put a lot of lime down, particularly where the truck and trailer is sitting. So there's kind of 2 purposes for that. One is kill everything, or try to kill everything that falls off of that truck. And the other is the driver, in case all of a sudden he's not doing what he's supposed to be doing in terms of changing boots and wearing slips and things like that. He's at least walking through lime at the same time, that he's not walking through that stuff that's coming off his trailer and on the yard, and then jumping into the trailer and contaminating the trailer. So it's kind of twofold purpose of the lime right there. Okay, so that's number 4. So let's talk. We haven't even entered the barn yet, but this all relates to the loadout, because all of this pertains to stuff coming down the loadout dock and where it comes from. And so let's talk about the actual loadout. So the doors. A lot of this is real simple, obvious stuff, right? So you need good seals on there. We don't want birds and other animals living in there. All sounds simple, but be surprised if you actually take a close look at what's going on. These things sometimes go by the wayside, or you walk past them every day, not really paying attention to them, and they're actually potential risks. Bumpers is a big one. Bumpers, the number of bumpers that are actually not ripped up, torn, and full of stuff related to shipping is probably higher than most people think, probably higher than I think, and it holds stuff that was on the trailer, stuff from outside. It's just sitting there waiting. And here's a nice looking dock. When I walked up to this farm this week, I saw this dock. I thought, oh, that's a good example of a good dock, right? So let's take a picture of what it should look like. So that's pretty good, right? Looks clean. Bumpers look pretty good, that kind of thing. So thought that was good. Okay, well, let's take a little closer look. Oh, there's a bird nest up in there. They tore it down, so they recognized it was there. So that's good. So there is a bird nest in there, though. So that's not the greatest idea. The seal looks pretty good, though. This is the seal I'm talking about, that we don't have big drafts coming in on those seals. Doors in pretty good shape. I've seen some really rough-looking doors. The seal down at the bottom here is good. We don't have huge gaping holes down here. Some of these doors sometimes all bust to pieces and that sort of thing. This one looks pretty good, you know, but this is the same dock. Now, just this tiny little crack down here. You can't really see it on this side. Looks good from this view, but you come in a little closer and that's what that looks like. And you can see straw bits all over the place here. Probably a little bit of manure and things. So this is where the backup sprayer comes in. I think I got my numbering off. This is number 5. So with that garden sprayer I was talking about before, it's a good idea to take and spray this all off, rinse all this stuff off, because it is on the outside, particularly if you're in a high-risk PED area where it's all blowing into this area. It could be settling on stuff here. Spray this all down, super cheap, super fast, super easy. Get this all rinsed off. Might have to sweep the snow out of here first, especially these flat portions here where the pigs actually walk. Right there is a good one. When to do this, it doesn't have to be right before the driver comes in, because we don't want people walking in and out of the barn either, unless they have to. So if we know we're shipping, a good time, like that day, a good time to do that is right when you pull into the yard, before you come into the barn to shower in. Just take and rinse this all off. Then you don't have to come out when the truck gets there. It doesn't have to be seconds or minutes before the truck comes. So then it's all done. It's all ready to go. So that's another one. So let's call this actually number 5. Okay, so back to the main takeaway message here of it being a giant shop vacuum cleaner. That is the hog barn. Now let's actually move to the inside and talk about the inside. Okay, and so on the inside, what normally happens, unless other measures have been put into place, the way these barns, the majority of the barns that I've ever seen are designed, whether it's a finisher, nursery, sow, multiplier, it doesn't really matter. The way almost all of them are designed that I've seen, if you open up that loadout door, you will be sucking in air from the outside down the loadout ramp. Okay, so if there's anything that's lying there or floating around right outside that loadout, this dust, dirt particle stuff we were talking about before, vapor, if it's sitting out there and it's a strong enough vacuum, it's coming into the barn. Okay, so if it's sitting on the back of the trailer and the trailer's getting knocked around and stuff is falling down, it has potential to be drawn down that loadout ramp. If it's really dusty and for air brakes or whatever, it's summertime and it's dusty and you've got a lot of fans going, you've got a lot of vacuum, you're sucking that dust right down that loadout ramp. So that's basically how the principle here with the vacuum cleaner analogy. So this is just a rough blueprint, and you can translate into a sow barn or a nursery or wean to finish or finisher barn, what have you. So let's say I just drew this loadout room on here. A lot of farms have loadout rooms. Some do. Some of the finisher sites don't. Finisher sites, it would look like more like this, and then just the hallway here, and then your office over here, and this is your loadout chute, and there's no room. But the principles still apply. So wherever there's a red star, that's where all the doors are in the barn. So there's usually a door here. I forgot a red star. There's usually a door to the chute. Not always, but there often will be. So if this is a sow barn and these are farrowing crates, of course, you've got a door going into each of those rooms. And if this is gestation, you got doors going into there. And then the green is where the fans are. So the fans, of course, are causing vacuum towards these rooms. So you got fans along the gestation wall. They could be on this wall, this wall. They could be all over the place here. But bottom line is there's a vacuum in there due to these fans. And every one of these rooms has a vacuum in there due to these fans. And so that's where this vacuum is coming from that sucks everything down this loadout chute. Is all of these fans are drawing it instead of out of the inlets. It's if these doors are open, it sucks it right down this loadout chute. Okay, so this is just one of our farms, a sow barn, kind of similar to this. You're looking. This first picture is looking from here towards the loadout door. So there's a loadout door, pens on both sides. If you take the opposite look, there's the door into the hallway that goes into the farm. And this is from the loadout dock. Okay, so this is pretty typical. Here's a ramp that goes onto the truck as well. So what are we trying to do here? We're talking about vacuum and more vacuum. So ideally, we would like to either neutralize the vacuum or even pressurize that entire room so that we don't draw in stuff from the outside, regardless of if it's off the trailer or in the air. So how do we do that? How can we do that? And like I said in the beginning, not all of these things can apply to every single farm because some farms just aren't designed quite right. But in a lot of cases, there's some simple retrofits and renos that can be done, which we've done as well in a couple of scenarios. Just by installing fans and interior walls and things like that is probably the most common way to do it. Normally, we would do it from the inside of the barn. There are scenarios where attic air is directly blown into the loadout. You want to be pretty careful with that because that's really, really cold air and you're going into a warm situation there. You could cause a lot of fog and humidity and moisture issues if you pull in it straight out of the attic. And so generally, those fans are located, like I say, on the inside of the wall here. In this particular case, it's gestation. Other scenarios, there's hallways that go by here, and they pull it straight out of the hallway. But what ends up happening is this loadout pressurizing fan is competing with all the other fans in the barn. So it's drawing from the same area, trying to push air in the opposite direction of all these other fans. And so that's where some of the problems arise, why we can't pressurize properly. So how we try to do that, try to pressurize that is, as many of the interior doors need to be closed as possible. I recognize there's scenarios where you're short-staffed, you have one person in a finishing barn, and it's very difficult to do a lot of these things, but a lot of this can be done. Easier with more staff, but it can be done. Okay, so talked about this. Reasons why we can't. Obvious reasons we can't pressurize these loadouts. The loadout room itself into the hallway is open. That often will be enough in itself to neutralize whatever pressure you're trying to make in that loadout. Is having a hallway door open to the loadout. Then all the other fans that are in the barn are drawing against your pressure, and you just lost your pressure. Other room doors are open. So if you go back to this here, we're trying to pressurize in here, and this is open here, but you've got this door, this door, this door, this door, this door, this door. If you've got all these doors open, you're opening it up to these fans. And so that's a very common thing we see is when we're moving weanlings out of here, down here, or finisher hogs down here through this door, or sows, and then out this way. This door is open here. These fans are working right opposite of this fan, and you'll often lose all of your pressure, and you're back to a vacuum scenario because this fan's not generally strong enough to compete with what's going on here, especially not in summer. Okay, so that's the most common reason it doesn't really want to work, even if you're set up to pressurize. That's just a weanling picture there. So what do we do about it? Well, if we can do it, and in many scenarios we can, we try to move pigs into that loadout room, and then we close that loadout room door. Then we pressurize that room, and then we open the loadout door. Okay, so if you're that's the ideal scenario if we can do it. It doesn't always work. With weanlings, it works probably better than anywhere else, but it can be done. So if we have to go back, and this is where often we'll see mistakes where staff have to go back and get more pigs, right? So what we want to do there is close the loadout first, the door, before we open the hallway door and go get more pigs. That's often neglected. We leave the loadout door open and we just run out the hallway door to go get more pigs, and then instantly we've lost all our pressure, and the vacuum starts sucking down the loadout again. Right, and so that's a very common mistake. One of the things that can be done is you can put a secondary door in there that you don't have to close your loadout door. There's a secondary door in the chute. I've seen a couple of those. That actually works really well too. I'll show you a picture of one of those. If you can't pressurize the loadout at all, and there's farms like that all over the place, there's no possible way of pressurizing the loadout. Farms don't even have a loadout, let's say. Okay, so in those scenarios, we try to, at least, you can minimize the vacuum in that area by keeping, as we discussed, keep as many of those room doors closed as you can, so we try to reduce the vacuum that those rooms are drawing. Okay, so the other thing that we do is before we open any loadout door, we move as many pigs into the hallways as we can, then close the room door, and then open the loadout door so that we don't have those rooms drawing at the same time that loadout door is open. Okay, so that's another way to do it, to at least reduce the vacuum. Okay, so again, pressurizing the loadout's not going to be perfect either, even if it's set up perfectly. Even if you have the ideal setup, it's still not perfect. And we talked about layering biosecurity. There's holes you can shoot through this as well. So, for example, you run pigs up there, pigs come back, not very often, but every once in a while you get a pig coming running that back down the chute. They also kick bedding out of there. Okay, that bedding could be contaminated from the drive over, right? So they kick stuff down there. So that's where the backup plan comes in. Backup to the backup to the backup, right? So we layer this. So what's our backup? Well, what we do, especially in high-risk scenarios in high-value farms such as sow barns that are in PED territory or PED breaking territory, is we treat that loadout room. And again, the sow barns should have a loadout room. I think just about every single sow barn has some form of a loadout room. We treat that as a completely different space that we have to change clothes to get into and change clothes to get out of. We also have designated people that work in that loadout, and they don't go get pigs from the rest of the barn. They stay in that room the entire loading process. Okay, so how we set that up is in that loadout room we'll have hooks or Rubbermaid containers, whatever they want, with extra coveralls and boots and washing aprons and those types of things hanging there. And we've also specifically plumbed in an extra pressure washer line that you can quick couple to that's inside of the loadout. And this is a common mistake that I've seen where when we want to wash the loadout and prevent things from coming down the loadout, we drag that pressure washer hose and wand from the far reaches of the barn all the way to the end of the loadout dock. We wash that loadout area is all washed, and then we drag that entire hose and wand and everything all the way back to where it came from at the far end of the barn again. So we recognized after a while that, that's probably not a great idea. What are we dragging all the way back there? Maybe we should put a quick coupler in there and just have a separate hose and a separate wand and just leave it in there, that we're not dragging this in there. So that's a good thing to set up as well, is setting that up as almost like a separate attached barn or a cube barn, like some of the attached cube barns are set up. Okay, so so we talked about that. So the loadout staff, they leave their boots. There's two different ways to do this. Depends on how intense you want to get on this. We have some that are really intense and want to do everything they physically possibly can, and some just can't physically do it, or they don't have the staff to do it, or the setup to do it. So there's two ways to do it. So we got staff that, as they cross the line of that door going out into the loadout, they change their coveralls, they change their boots as they step over and now they're in the hallway, or sorry, in the loadout. And they have another staff that'll take those boots and move them out of the way so the loading of pigs doesn't run over all their stuff. The LS is just loadout staff. So they change going in there, and then they have another set of staff that are bringing pigs into that loadout. The staff that are in the barn don't cross into the loadout. They bring them to the loadout door, but they don't walk into the loadout. The loadout staff take them from there. Okay, so there's a very clear line there. You don't walk into that room. You don't walk out of that room if you're the loadout staff. Okay, so once that's all done, so we've loaded all these pigs, then the farm staff go about doing what they're doing. The loadout staff then put on the aprons, fire up the pressure washer, they wash out the loadout, the chute, all that stuff. They put all their stuff back, they hang up the hose, they hang up the wand, nothing gets dragged back in there. And there's at this point, there's two different ways to go about it. So they've washed everything. They've washed the wand. They washed the hose, the aprons. At this point, they either change back into their boots and coveralls that are placed back for them in the hallway. They put their dirty coveralls in a garbage bag, and then they walk back to the office, put the coveralls straight into the laundry, and they shower. They don't go walking around the barn. We don't want anything that's on them spread around in the barn. They go shower, they change, and then they go back and help the rest of the farm staff. Okay, so that's one way to do it. The more intense way of doing it is they take their coveralls, they put them in a garbage bag, they leave their boots on that they washed, they jump out the loadout dock, they come in the front entrance of the hog barn. They leave those boots there, they shower in, they'll pass their dirty laundry either through the shower, and then once they get through, they'll put it into the laundry, but they shower back in through the entrance. They actually will jump out the loadout dock. You got to be a little bit careful, of course, in winter that you're not going to jump onto a skating rink outside that loadout dock. So not many will do it that way, but we do have some that'll do it that way, where we'll jump right out of the loadout dock. So like an external exit type thing. And I believe we even have one situation where there was a man door installed on the side of the chute that you could exit that way. You don't actually have to jump out the chute, the end of the chute. So it's a little safer. So that's another way to do that one too. Okay, a lot of information, went through it really quick. And again, there's a lot of different ways PD can enter the barn. This one, the loadout situation, there's a lot of different moving parts that can bring that virus into the barn through that loadout dock. Lots of different ways to talk about, lots of different ways to deal with it, or different areas that have to be dealt with. Okay, so, but it is very common that it gets drawn down that loadout dock. And so these preventative practices, again, best case scenario, is what I described. Totally realize you can't do this on every single barn. Very few can, but there's a lot of principles here that can be applied to every site. And yeah, it is important to do our best with that in mind. Okay, so I don't know how long that was. I'm not even looking at a clock. I hope I didn't get too far down.
We do have a few questions, but I do know that we're running on a bit of a timeline for Glenn as well, Tony. So I think what we'll do is we'll move over to Glenn's presentation, and which is not too terribly long, and I know we have a time commitment for you as well. So we will get to questions here at the end. So thank you very much, Tony. That was very informative, excellent information. I will ask you to stop sharing, and I will share my screen and finish off the presentation here with Dr. Deiser and some of the other factors that we have seen throughout the outbreak. So just a quick check, Glenn, can you see my slide?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, I will then click forward to Transport Biosecurity and take it away.
Okay, good morning all. Thanks for joining us again today on this PED update. I think most of you know roughly who I am. I'm Animal Health Surveillance Veterinarian with the province of Manitoba, underneath the Chief Veterinary Office. So just very quickly, I know some of you have questions you want to follow up with Tony on. I'm just going to cover a few additional pieces relatively quickly so we can get to those. Key one that ties into Tony's presentation, of course, is Transport Biosecurity. I am not going to cover this in broad detail. That would probably be an advantage. I'll cover off a few key things that we've identified in this outbreak. I would say there's nothing new under the sun when it comes to transport biosecurity related to PED and PED outbreaks. Animal movements are frequent. There's a lot of transport movement happening out there. A couple key things: ensuring proper cleaning and disinfection of transports is critical. This is not the time. I know it's tempting, but it's not the time to slide back. A few things that we've noted when we compare what the commercial washes are doing with individuals that are doing their own washes in those particular wash bays. There's a lot of time difference. Commercial wash crew on a transport trailer can be up to 3 hours. In some cases, individuals washing their own truck are an hour or maybe a little bit more. That alone suggests to us that there, in some cases, should be a little bit more care taken. Regular communication between producers and transporters is essential. Transporters are working very hard to keep routes segregated, so trailers that are coming in contact with high-risk, high-traffic sites that have known or are typically contaminated with PED. Those transports are attempting as much as possible to be segregated, but it's worth double checking with your transporter to make sure that is the case. And finally, a point that I would make here, especially during this outbreak, if you're having a transporter come to your farm, or again cleaning and disinfecting your own transport after you've done a major delivery, in particular to a high-risk, high-traffic site, and you're in a buffer area or you're at risk for PED, baking is a must. Even then, we would point out that there's no disinfection that is perfect. A couple of some feedback we've had from some people who've assessed these types of activities, that even the very best activities, you can get up to a 1% failure rate. That means contamination. It doesn't necessarily mean exposure from a virus. It means that there might be dirt there. It doesn't mean that the virus is actually in that dirt. But it's worth noting that even in the best possible scenarios, you can get up to 1% where a transport could be dirty. Whether that actually has a pathogen on it or not is not necessarily the case. So it might not be as bad as 1%, but it's just something to keep in the back of your mind that's a possibility. Next slide, please. Dead stock pickup. Just a few things to reinforce on that. Obviously, farm level biosecurity is essential. That yardway and barn doorway is essential with dead stock, as well as the other activities you have on the farm. We found that some in this current outbreak, that's high traffic facilities that may have PED on them were being picked up midway through a route. We certainly contacted the dead stock pickup and they have immediately responded to that and made sure there's changes in place. Obviously, we want those at the end of the route and if not, on its own separate route. So that's been communicated to producers that were on those routes and to the company as well. And just a reminder that rendering facilities or landfills that receive dead stock we consider them high-risk, high-traffic sites as well. And if you have a farm that breaks with PED and they sent their dead stock out a few days before, you can avoid that dead stock being potentially contaminated and arriving at a rendering facility or arriving at a landfill. So it is always important to treat those facilities as high-risk and high-traffic as well. Next slide, please. I'm going to cover a very quick case example. I want to stress that we don't have a wide overview of service provider disinfection and cleaning and disinfection protocols here. We're just using this particular case example that came out of this investigation. As a reminder, And I would stress that this was a trace out contact. It was not a trace in. It wasn't the source to the farm, but it had been a service provider, does work in the agriculture sector, so was involved in swine and poultry operations, was on a positive site basically the day before that site was confirmed to have clinical signs and ended up testing positive. They were not in with the animals themselves. They were outside of that area, but they were probably in a close enough area that obviously their equipment got contaminated. They used a typical cleaning disinfection protocol, wiped things down, sprayed it with Lysol, and we tested them afterwards, basically about 4 to 5 days after they were on the site, and they tested PCR positive. We did that again. They washed, cleaned, and disinfected again, and a week later they were still PCR positive. And it was actually after they switched their cleaning and disinfection protocol on the third time they ended up coming negative. So a couple key things that came out of that. Aerosol spray cans as a disinfectant, we're not convinced that A, the disinfection is strong enough, or B, it can be applied strong enough to actually provide effective disinfection. I actually did the testing on the equipment in this case. I would say it was relatively clean, so I didn't have a lot of issues with their cleaning protocol, but the disinfection protocol, it seemed like they probably weren't getting good enough coverage with an aerosol, kind of that home-based disinfectant spray can. Using 4 of them or 5 of them, probably still not enough. You're better off using more agricultural-oriented disinfection for this type of equipment. The other thing that was interesting is that the service provider had used his own ladder, air hose, compressors, extension cords, and lo and behold, those were the most contaminated equipment. So there's a lot of service providers, and we can understand why. They're quite reluctant to put lock boxes in the barns. They claim that they don't necessarily get their equipment that it doesn't necessarily keep their equipment there when they need it. So they do want to bring in their own specialty equipment, and there's certainly protocols that can be applied to the specialty equipment that needs to come in. But what was interesting in this case is things like ladders, air hoses, and extension cords, which are available on the farm, were ended up being the most contaminated. And that makes sense. You've got boots on the ground, boots on the ladder. It's going to get contaminated. Hoses and extension cords drag across surfaces, so it's pretty obvious that they're going to get contaminated. And even things like air compressors, they're pulling air out of the ambient environment in high concentration, so it's pretty easy for them to get contaminated as well. So we would suggest that producers look at the opportunity to provide the basics to service providers that are coming to their farms. Obviously, it has to be decent enough quality for them to do the work that they need to do. But if it's some of the basic things that you can avoid dragging into having a service provider drag into your farm, it's a good opportunity to look at making sure you can take those steps as well. And just limit the amount of equipment that does need to be brought in if you're getting a secondary service provider or a service provider in. The good news in this particular case is the service provider is able to stand that equipment down for 3 weeks, which many would not be able to do, but they certainly had enough crews and enough equipment that they could set it aside, and they did not need to use it in any other their site visits, including agricultural sites. So we had that advantage, but that also would not necessarily be the case for many service providers. And so a message to any service provider would be best to have a good cleaning and disinfection protocol that is going to be effective the first time around, as opposed to having to hold equipment and repeat. Next slide, please. My final piece is I'm going to cover a little bit on weather analysis. And just to give you a bit of an idea of what this actually is, we did weather analysis on 11 of 21 premises in the current outbreak because weather and primarily wind patterns was considered a significant risk factor. Of those 11, 6 showed fairly strong support, 4 weaker support, and then 1 was not, and I'll show that one shortly. And I want to stress, kind of to what Tony was covering, this puts the virus onto the farm, maybe into the farm as well, but it does not necessarily walk it into where the pigs are. So I want to stress that if you've got a wind wind pattern that is blowing the virus from an infected farm onto your farm, it's not throw up your hands and give up, right? I mean, the things like Tony covered on the loadout side, taking care on in your controlled access zone so you're not dragging anything from the yard into the premises is still very important and helps limit the impact of this type of factor. So just looking at infected premises number 14 here, which you can see its date of break was on November the 24th. What was interesting about this is a IP broke essentially 6 days beforehand. We're looking at wind blowing in the direction from that, and that's what those blue triangles are. That's indicating that the wind is blowing in the direction of the farm. In the circle onto the right side, you can see that it was in the northwest direction. But what's interesting is those speeds were upwards of 30, 40 kilometers an hour, and it was in 6-hour blocks. So that means the average over that 6 hours was 40 kilometers an hour on that high point. In that time frame, there was a loadout from that farm that happened. It was an indication from the vet involved that the loadout was poorly designed, and lo and behold, PED broke in the sows that were immediately adjacent to the loadout after that loadout had happened. So the timing of this particular case, again, weather's not the sole factor, but it certainly landed the virus in the area of the farm. And with a loadout issue, it brought it into the farm, and is the most likely way that farm broke from our perspective. So next slide, please. And I just wanted to cover, as I noted when I started on the weather analysis, we had 6 with fairly strong support, kind of like the first one. But this was the one farm that did not. Is very close proximity to 2 other farms that had PED. But when we look at the weather data with it, even though it broke in what seemed like a reasonable timeline related to the first case on the left-hand side there that was positive, there was just no wind patterns that actually supported the movement. And so it doesn't mean that it couldn't have been tracked on the farm another way from that adjacent farm, but weather in this particular case did not support it. So I just wanted to cover off those kind of few things on a quick summary, just revisiting the transport and a reminder to all to make sure we've done what we can on that side. An update on where things stand on dead stock, and again to reinforce that we want to take the extra care to make sure that high traffic sites are not being visited before they arrive on a farm. The case example on the importance of service provider cleaning disinfection protocols and the use of your own equipment if it's simple and easy to do, and then of course the weather analysis, and that wraps it up for me.
Thank you, Glenn. We do have one question in the chat regarding the case example of the service provider. To your memory, did the service provider visit any hog farms prior to coming onto the IP that it did visit? The question is about if it wasn't tested, was that potentially contaminated before coming onto the farm?
Yeah.
My memory serves, they didn't visit any hog farms.
No, correct. We did a full trace back with them and reviewed what their visits were prior to the visit to the hog farm, and they didn't. They had not been. They had not been on an operation from their standpoint for a week, and this particular equipment would have been even longer than that. So the service provider, the staff member themselves, and the equipment involved would have been, I don't know how long it was since it had been on a farm, but it was a considerable amount of time. We were talking weeks. So company itself had not been on the farm for a week beforehand, and this particular staff member and the equipment long before that.
Thank you. Thank you, Glenn, for that overview. We will wrap up here now with a few takeaways. We have seen, again, with this outbreak, the working relationship that we've built with MPC and Agricultural Resource Development continues to be strong. And we have had the opportunity to continue to build trust in terms of how we work together and share information, and that I think really does help to respond to these types of events, and truthfully can be applied not only to PED but in a number of issues that we face in our sector. So having those working relationships and building on that trust is key. We do continue to engage with our sector partners, and they are coming to the table ready to share information and provide us with direction and information, what they are seeing and lessons they are learning. This is, again, extremely valuable, not only for us at MPC, but also just the sector as a whole. To have folks engaged and willing to share information is just so important. We have noticed, in terms of outbreak response, we have noticed that the traceback work does differ across the cases. Glenn's team and us at MPC, we are working to fill the gaps, the information that the farms don't have, tracing down leads that need maybe a little different source or helping out in those regards. But there's a large majority that's being managed internally between the herd vet and the farm. And then there's other cases that are more reliant on CBO MPC engagement to really trace down some of those contacts. What we do see, and we've gone over them here this morning, it's afternoon now, the risk factors for PED, and Tony did touch on this as well. They remain from previous outbreaks. We've learned about them before, but we continue to learn about them and how they interact and what role they play on the farm. In terms of producer, some of the takeaways I'd like to leave you with here this afternoon now is to be aware of those potential risks and the farm design, the flow. These are all different based on your farm, and work with your veterinarian and your staff on how to best mitigate these risks that you've identified for your specific farm. We do need to focus on enhanced biosecurity. I know that biosecurity fatigue is a real thing, let alone for PED, but through our current COVID situation as well, biosecurity is right in our faces. However, right now, we do need to really pull up our boots and really focus on enhanced biosecurity, being that we've had, or the position that we're currently in. For more information on biosecurity, I've got a link here in the presentation on our Manitoba Pork website. There's a lot of information on biosecurity related to a lot of the stuff that was talked about here today. I'll reinforce the need for communication. We've talked about communication throughout the presentation, talking with your staff, your service providers, your vet, in terms of what's happening on the farm, what your health status is, what your expectations are in terms of what your biosecurity protocols are on your farm if somebody needs to come in for a specific reason. All of these require thorough communication so everybody is understanding of what, like I say, what's expected of them. Also, know the signs. PED there's lots of resources again on our website in terms of the clinical signs and what to look for, though I'm sure many of you are already aware. And if you do suspect or you see some of those clinical signs, please report that to your vet immediately. The quicker we can get on it, the quicker we can kind of lock things down and prevent spread. So Lastly, I'm going to leave you again with a plug for the Manitoba Coordinated Disease Response. For those producers that are not currently signed on to the MCDR, is what we call it, providing up-to-date information on the PEDv cases in the province, we strongly encourage you to do so. Producers can sign up by signing that confidentiality agreement. And to do so, please contact us at NPC, info@Manitoba Pork, or reach out to me directly, and we can get you signed on with a username and password to access the platform. So that is all that I had for today. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank our presenters, Dr. Tony Nicol and Dr. Glenn Deiser. Glenn did have to pop off for another call. I know you all are very busy dealing with not only the PED outbreak, but the normal day-to-day of your jobs. So thank you very much for coming on and preparing and providing us with the information that you have. I will open it up for any last questions that we may have. I don't see anything in the Q&A that hasn't been dealt with. And a comment here from Cam. Thank you to everyone who took the time to attend. Of course, our doors and emails and phones at MPC are always open. Absolutely echo that very strongly. Please feel free to reach out. And if you need information, the website is an absolute excellent resource as well. But if you'd rather chat with somebody, like I say, our emails, phones, doors are always open. So.
I think you got 2 hands up there, Janelle.
Okay, I've got, we're learning this function here, Tony. Thank you so much.
Just saw that now.
What do we got here? Okay. We'll start with Mark.
Hey there, thanks. Just wondering, like, if we're expecting this outbreak to last a while longer, what our expectations are there?
Tony, do you want to look in your crystal ball, or should I look in mine?
Yeah, that's. Let me just hold on a second here. There I am. Well, so again, this will be the first time we've seen it in any significance at this time of year, right? So, based on some of the stuff that we've been watching, like in the area spread and different means this virus is getting into farms, I've been wondering the same thing and contemplating the pros and cons of having, well, there are no pros, but will it move more, the same, or less having it at this time of year versus other times of year? And my gut is telling me that based on how this thing has moved into farms in the past, that it will not be as significant a spread or last as long or infect as many barns as it normally would, let's say, if it hit in April, May, and June. And we talked about the vacuums in the farms and stuff, and I think that'll be one of the big factors. I think, yes, we know the virus survives better in cold than it does in hot. It does not like UV light, and so it is in a very good environment to survive right now. However, it is not in a good environment to move around in terms of there's not a lot of dust out there. We don't have a lot of seeding operations. Well, we shouldn't have any seeding operations going on right now. We have seen it move in dust storms, dirt storms, shortly after seeding, shortly after lagoons are emptied onto farmland and then subsequently worked in dry conditions. We've seen that. All the lagoons have now essentially been pumped. We've seen quite a bit of spread with agitating of lagoons when lagoons are emptied. That whole sector of lagoon management is all pretty much done. So a lot of the big risk factors that have moved this virus in previous years are a lot less of a risk this time around. So for those reasons, I would say it shouldn't last as long or be as extensive.
Thanks, Tony.
I say shouldn't, not won't. Shouldn't.
Absolutely. Jose. Oh, maybe that was. Okay, we'll move on to Rick Prege. You just have to unmute yourself, Rick.
Oh, as you know, I didn't think I had my hand up there. Sorry, I did that by
Oh.
mistake. But what I do is I text you a question, but you can answer it. Is this presentation recorded and available for viewing later on by other people?
We did not record the presentation, if I am correct, Joey, but I do have access to the slides. I will work with Tony and Glenn as to their comfort in sharing them, but I don't believe this was recorded, Joey. That is correct. Jose, did you have a question? You just have to unmute yourself. Okay, maybe not. If there are no other questions, again, I would like to thank our presenters, Dr. Nickel and Dr. Geiser, for taking the time. I also would like to thank everybody for signing on in December. I know there's lots going on, so thank you all for participating here this afternoon. And as mentioned, if there is any follow-up, please feel free to reach out to me directly or through the MPC email, and we can be in touch. So wishing you all a wonderful rest of your day, and thank you again. Take care.